friends, welcome back to my channel. We're here today with another review in the series 30 more reviews in 30 days. It's almost the end of the month. We're not going to get to 30 reviews this month, but that's fine. We set a goal, we didn't meet it, but we did a lot that we probably wouldn't have if we hadn't set the goal. So I'm fine with that. I don't know what number review this is. It's not 30. I know it's not 30, but it's somewhere something more than zero, which I'm happy about. So today's review is about Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is a translation by Richard Peviar and Larissa Voloksonsky. Dostoevsky is Russian, so this was originally written in Russian, published in 1866, and I'm going to read the synopsis for you that's written on the back, because I feel like this is not just a synopsis, it's more for review, and it will tell you a little bit about the novel. So it says, it is a murder story told from a murderer's point of view that implicates even the most innocent reader in its enormities. It is a cat and mouse game between a tormented young killer and a cheerfully implacable detective. It is a preternaturally acute investigation of the forces that impel a man towards sin, suffering, and grace. I started reading this as a buddy read with Columbus and Rosalie, and I'd had this copy for a while. I don't know when I was eventually going to pick it up, but I read it because I started this buddy read with Rosalie and Columbus. And we read it. The buddy read happened over about a month. I continued reading. I was almost done, and then I cycled back and reread the last 100 pages or so, because I really wanted to study a little more in depth the conclusions, the resolution to the plot. So this is about a young man named Raskolnikov who is in his early 20s, living in Russia in the 1800s. And through the course of telling the story, Dostoevsky talks about the times. He talks a little bit about Russian culture. So one of the things that happens here is that working class people who are studying to be elevated to the aristocratic class, because they're in that process of transition, they get treated like the upper class that they are ascending to. So students, university students, are treated with some amount of deference because they are students, because at some point they will be aristocracy or higher class. So they're not treated as working class, even though members of their families are still working class. So in this one, Raskolnikov is a 20-something-year-old man. I think his father has died, and as the young man in his family, he will be the person who would be responsible for his mother and sister. But because he is a student, they have been instead funneling resources to supporting him. So he's in, is it St. Petersburg? He's in the town, and they're still more in the countryside, and they've been supporting him with whatever little means they have. But things have happened, and so Dostoevsky now writes about Raskolnikov committing some amount of crime, writes about Raskolnikov committing a crime because of a motivation that is financial, or at least it seems that way. He has become desperate. He doesn't want his sister and his mother to do what they've been thinking about doing for money. So he's decided that he's going to commit some crime for the monetary gain and solve his family's financial issues. And he rationalizes that he can do this because the person who would be the victim of this crime is not someone that society would really miss, because he weighs the cost of an older person's life versus the younger person's life that he would be sacrificing for. So there is a crime, but the book is more concerned with the philosophy behind the crime and how it affects the people who are victims and aggressors and all the bystanders, all the people whose lives are affected in some way by these crimes. I love how Dostoevsky speaks about the culture, speaks about the times, and gives some insight into the culture through his narrative, through the naming traditions. Just this book is brilliant in its portrayal of 1800s Russia. Even as it relates to naming, I love that each one of the characters is called something different based on who the speaker is. So Raskolnikov has a sister, And when he speaks to his sister, he calls her something different from what their mother would call her, because what he calls her would be revealing not just her name, but the nature of the relationship between him and his sister. The mother would call her something different. So while that is revelatory, if you're not familiar with Russian culture, Russian traditions, it may also be a little off-putting because each character seems to have multiple names. So I would suggest that if you're going to be reading this one, if you're reading this translation, there is a list in the front with all the different variations of people's names. You may want to have that handy while you're reading the book. And if your translation doesn't have that list, then maybe you want to make that list as you go through, just to kind of keep track of who the people are, because there are a lot of characters and they're all important. And while this is third person perspective following Raskolnikov, we also have moments and scenes that are occurring with other people. There are lots of other subplots that affect this main thing, and they're all interesting and they're all significant, and you at all points need to know what is happening and who is speaking, because Dostoevsky writes in this circuitous way, following the story in a circular way. You read about things that have happened, you read about other people's thoughts about what happened, you read about Raskolnikov himself revisiting scenes, and both physically and mentally, and trying to resolve things for himself, resolving what he has said from what he has done, and what he needs to keep close to his chest, and what he wants to give. This is beautiful. It's a beautiful rendition of the philosophical and psychological discussion of crime. There's also some scholarly and literary components here, because we have Raskolnikov as a student writing logically about crime and criminality long before the crime is committed. So we have a little bit more of his unrelated, hypothetical reasoning, even separate and apart from his trying to rationalize what he has done. So there are two things about this novel that I specifically want to mention in this review. One is, I love how Dostoevsky speaks about the physiological relationship to what's happening. So how people react in their bodies to the stresses that are happening around them. And in this one, we have characters who, based on events that are happening in their life, become feverish. People who swoon and faint very easily, and they need to be resuscitated. And by the time they've come around the event, the cataclysmic event has been resolved. Like, that's pretty convenient for a novelist, right? But it's also really interesting what people do when they think that the person who is, or I guess the main character, how people say things and what they say when the main character isn't around to hear them, even if they're physically present. That's really interesting. The other thing that I really just wanted to comment on in this book is how Dostoevsky gets the reader involved in that almost mental manipulation of the logics of human behavior. So we have Raskolnikov trying to rationalize his crime, both hypothetically before the crime is committed, and in some sort of a confession to himself, or just some logistic musings after the crime. But we also see the comparison between what he thinks about the motivation for committing a crime, the money as a motive, and how that contrasts with what he does with money. So there's some discussion here about how people live with regards to their beliefs in the Bible. And you know that saying that comes from the Bible, the love of money is the root of all evil. And so you expect that someone who would commit a crime because of money, or whose crime is financially motivated, would be a person who would be evil in a lot of other ways. But we see Raskolnikov doing things when he does have money or when he has access to money that betray his kindness, his philanthropy. And I think that that is just such an interesting device of comparison and contrast. And Dostoevsky does that brilliantly in here. So those are two things that if you're going to be reading this book anytime soon, that I'm going to urge you to look for as well. The different ways that people talk about money and whether that makes them criminal or whether that makes them more sympathetic or empathetic as a character. If a person holds on to money, if a person is hoarding money, does that make them less sympathetic as a victim? Does make a person who commits a crime against, the kind of Shylock money lender, does that make that person less of a criminal? I don't know. I'm not saying that it does or it doesn't. I'm just saying it's an interesting thought experiment to go through as you're reading this book. Highly recommend that you check out Crime and Punishment. I don't want to go too much into the story itself because I don't want to spoil the story. I mean, I know that's kind of weird because this book is 160 years old. It shouldn't be a spoiler, but I want you to read it. Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is probably one of his most famous novels, and I could see why. I love this book. I want to read more like this. So if you've read Crime and Punishment and you can think of recommendations of books like this, classics or not, let me know about it. I haven't read a lot of the Russian classics, so maybe this will be the start of me reading more Dostoevsky. This is only my second book that I'm reading from this author. So maybe Tolstoy next, we'll see. Definitely not reading Tolstoy in a month where I'm trying to read lots of other books. So that's my review of Crime and Punishment. I would love to chat with you in the comments down below if you've read this one, or if something I said in this video makes you want to pick it up. It's been lingering on your TBR for a while and you just haven't been sure that you want to read it anytime soon, but now you are thinking, maybe. Would love to chat with you in the comments down below. So for now, give this video a big thumbs up if you liked it. Subscribe if you want to see more. Let's chat in the comments. And until next time, happy reading.